At the airport parking lot, I found my son sleeping in his car with his twins. I asked him, "Where is the $200,000 I invested in your startup?" He broke down and said my wife and her family took everything and claimed I am mentally unstable. I got furious and told him to pack his things because we are fixing this now. Before I continue this story, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It means a lot to this old man. The wind at O'Hare Airport in Chicago cuts through you like a rusty knife, especially in February. It was 11 at night, and the snow was coming down sideways, the kind of storm that grounds flights and makes you question why you ever left the house. I had just spent 3 months in Alaska fishing in silence, trying to forget that I spent 30 years of my life cleaning up oil spills and corporate bankruptcies for energy giants. I am Harrison Stone, 70 years old, and I thought I had seen every kind of disaster a man can create. I was wrong. I dragged my duffel bag toward the long-term parking section G. All I wanted was the heated seat of my old Ford F-150 and a glass of whiskey in my quiet penthouse. I walked past rows of snow-covered sedans and SUVs, my breath steaming in the air. That is when I saw it. Tucked away in the darkest corner near a flickering light post was a silver Honda Civic. I stopped. I knew that car. I paid the down payment on that car 5 years ago. It belonged to my son Lucas. At first I thought he was here to pick me up, even though I had not told anyone I was coming back early. But the engine was idling with a rough choking sound, and the exhaust pipe was partially buried in a snowdrift. A father's instinct is a strange thing. It wakes up before your brain does. I dropped my bag in the slush and walked over. The windows were fogged up from the inside, covered in condensation. I wiped a circle on the driver's side glass and peered in. What I saw stopped my heart cold. Lucas was slumped over the steering wheel. He was wearing 3 sweaters, his face buried in a scarf, his beard overgrown and patchy. He looked like a man who had not showered in a week. But that wasn't what broke me. I looked into the back seat. My grandsons Leo and Toby, 6 years old, were huddled together under thin airline blankets that looked like they had been stolen from a flight. They were asleep, their small mouths open, a packet of cheap crackers empty on the seat between them. They looked like refugees. They looked like they had nowhere to go. My blood turned hotter than the coffee I used to drink before boardroom negotiations. I did not tap on the glass. I pounded on it with my fist. Boom, boom, boom. Lucas jerked awake so fast he hit his head on the window. His eyes were wide, filled with a primal terror. He didn't look at me and see his father. He looked at me and saw a threat. He fumbled for the door handle, panic written all over his face, like he was ready to drive off through the snow rather than face whoever was outside. "It is me," I shouted through the glass. "Open the door, Lucas." He froze. He squinted through the fog and the snow. When he realized it was me, his shoulders collapsed. He didn't smile. He didn't look relieved. He looked ashamed. He unlocked the door and I ripped it open. A wave of stale air, unwashed bodies, and despair hit me in the face. "Dad," he whispered. His voice was cracked dry. "Get out of the car," I said. My voice was low, the tone I used when I fired executives who tried to embezzle from my clients. "Dad." "I can explain," he stammered, stepping out into the freezing wind. He was wearing mismatched shoes. I grabbed him by the shoulders. He felt thin. Too thin. I looked him in the eye, ignoring the snow piling up on his shoulders. "6 months ago, I wired $200,000 to your business account," I said. "It was seed money. You told me your logistics software startup was ready to launch. You told me you were hiring engineers. You told me you were going to be the next big thing in tech. So tell me, Lucas, why are my grandsons sleeping in a car at O'Hare Airport like homeless children?" Lucas looked down at his feet. He was shaking, and it wasn't just from the cold. "It is gone, Dad," he choked out. "What do you mean gone? Did you gamble it?" Did the market crash, Brittany? He said, and the name came out like a curse. She took it. She took everything. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, the woman with the perfect smile and the expensive taste, the one who always ordered the most expensive wine at dinner and let me pay the bill. I felt a muscle in my jaw tighten. She is your chief financial officer, I said. She is your wife. How does she take everything without you knowing? She said I was working too hard. Lucas said, tears freezing on his cheeks now. She said I should focus on the code and let her handle the accounts. Last week I asked to see the ledger. I just wanted to see the runway we had left. She screamed at me. She told me I didn't trust her. And then I pressed. Then she locked me out of the bank accounts, he said. 2 days ago I came home and the locks were changed. She threw my clothes on the lawn. She filed a restraining order, Dad. She told the police I was unstable. She told them I was a danger to the boys. And you took the boys, she didn't want them. Lucas sobbed. She said they were too loud, and she needed space to think. She tossed them out with me. She said if I came back, she would have me arrested for violating the order. I looked at my son. He was a brilliant engineer, a man who could build complex architectures in the cloud, but when it came to human conflict, he was soft. I had raised him to be kind, to be gentle, and now I realized I might have crippled him. He had married a shark, and he was bleeding out in a parking lot. Why didn't you call me? I asked. I have a phone. I have resources. She told me you would be disappointed, Lucas whispered. She said you would hate me for losing your money. She said you would think I was a failure just like she does. She said if I called you, you would side with her because she is the one with the business sense. That was the moment the sadness ended and the war began. That was the moment Harrison Stone, the retired old man, died, and Harrison Stone, the crisis manager, came back to life. She had used my name to terrorize my son. She had gaslit him into believing I would abandon him. I looked past him at the boys in the back seat. Leo stirred and opened his eyes. Grandpa, he said, his voice small and sleepy. I let go of Lucas and leaned into the car. Hey, buddy, I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The camping trip is over. We are going to a hotel. I stood up and turned to Lucas. His head was still bowed, waiting for me to yell, waiting for the lecture. Get the boys, I said. Put them in my truck. Leave this car here. But Dad, the money, Lucas said. The 200,000. I lost it. You didn't lose it, I said, checking my watch. It was stolen. And we are going to get it back. But first we are going to feed these kids, and you are going to take a shower. Because tomorrow morning we are paying your wife a visit. And Lucas. He looked up, eyes red and swollen. Stop crying, I said. Tears don't pay the rent. We are done being victims. I walked to my truck, the snow crunching under my boots. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, familiar and cold. Brittany thought she had broken a weak husband. She didn't realize she had just poked a sleeping bear. She wanted a war over money fine. I spent 40 years fighting men who owned countries. She was about to find out that the $200,000 was the least of her problems. As I started the engine of my truck and watched Lucas carrying the sleeping twins through the snow, I made a mental list. First, get them safe. Second, find the money. Third, destroy the people who did this. I pulled out of the parking lot, the wipers fighting the snow. The city of Chicago was ahead of us, glowing in the distance. Somewhere in those lights, Brittany was probably sleeping in a warm bed, maybe even in the house I helped them buy, thinking she had won. She had no idea I was coming home. The drive into the city was a blur of sodium streetlights and silence. My Ford F-150 hummed along the Kennedy Expressway, cutting through the slush that covered the lanes. In the rearview mirror, I saw the boys had fallen back asleep, their heads resting against each other like two puppies in a storm. Lucas stared out the window, his eyes fixed on nothing, his hand trembling slightly on his knee. I did not turn on the radio. There was no music that could fix this. We arrived at my building in the Gold Coast district just past midnight. The doorman, a retired Marine named Clarence, who had worked the door for 15 years, saw us coming. He didn't ask why my son looked like a vagrant, or why my grandsons were wrapped in airline blankets. He simply held the door open and gave me a sharp nod. That is professionalism. That is loyalty. My penthouse on the 40th floor is not a home. It is a bunker. I bought it 5 years ago because it was quiet close to my lawyers and had a view of the lake that reminded me of how small our problems really are. But tonight, walking in with 3 refugees, the space felt cold. The marble floors echoed under our wet boots. The modern furniture looked too sharp, too uninviting. I turned up the thermostat and pointed Lucas toward the guest bathroom. "There are towels in the cabinet," I told him. "Clean yourself up. You smell like fear and gasoline." While he showered, I ordered 3 large pizzas from the only place that delivers this late. When the food arrived 20 minutes later, the boys were awake, sitting on the sprawling leather sofa, looking small and terrified. I opened the boxes on the coffee table. "Eat," I said gently. I have seen hungry men before. I have seen rig workers after a double shift. I have seen executives after a hostile takeover. But I have never seen anything like my own grandsons that night. They didn't just eat. They devoured. They shoved slices into their mouths with both hands, grease running down their chins, eyes darting around as if someone might come and snatch the food away. They ate as if they had not seen a hot meal in days. It took every ounce of my discipline not to break down right there. Instead, I poured 2 glasses of bourbon, one for me and one for Lucas, who walked into the living room looking like a ghost of the boy I raised. He was wearing a clean pair of my sweatpants and an old flannel shirt. He sat in the armchair opposite me, avoiding my gaze. The boys finished eating, and I set them up in the guest bedroom with the television on low volume. Once the door clicked shut, the silence in the living room became heavy, suffocating. I slid the glass of bourbon across the table toward him. "Drink," I said, "then talk. Start from the beginning, 48 hours ago." What happened? Lucas took a long swallow of the whiskey. He coughed, then took a deep breath. His hands were shaking so bad, the ice cubes clinked against the glass. "It started Tuesday morning," he said, his voice low. "I logged into the business account to pay the cloud server fees. The transaction was declined. I thought it was a glitch. I refreshed the page. The balance was 0, Dad. 0.00. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "And the 200,000 gone," Lucas said. "Transferred out in 4 chunks over the last 2 weeks." I went to find Brittany. She was in the kitchen making a smoothie like it was a normal Tuesday. I asked her what happened. I asked her if we had been hacked. And what did she say? "She laughed," Lucas said. He looked up at me and I saw the pain in his eyes. She actually laughed. She told me I was stressing too much. She said she moved the capital to a secure holding company for tax optimization. She told me I didn't understand finance and I should go back to writing code. I felt the familiar cold anger rising in my chest. That is classic gaslighting. Make the victim doubt their own reality. I told her that was illegal, Lucas continued. I told her that was investor money. Your money. I told her I was going to the bank to freeze everything. That is when she changed. Changed how? Her eyes went dead, he said. She put the blender down. She walked over to the hallway table and picked up a heavy crystal vase. She looked at me and said, "Nobody will believe you, Lucas. You are just a weak man living off his daddy's money." Then she threw the vase at me. Lucas rolled up the sleeve of his flannel shirt. There on his forearm was a massive bruise, deep purple and yellow, the kind that comes from blunt force trauma. "I blocked it," he whispered. It shattered against my arm. I was in shock. I didn't move. I didn't touch her. But then she did something I still can't process. She ran to the wall, Dad. She slammed her own forehead against the drywall. Thud, 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 until she was bleeding. Then she ripped the front of her blouse open. She screamed at the top of her lungs. "Help, he is killing me!" I closed my eyes for a second. I had seen this tactic in corporate blackmail schemes, but never in a marriage. It is the nuclear option. She called 911. Lucas said, staring into his glass. By the time the police arrived, she was sobbing on the floor, holding her head. She told them I attacked her because the business was failing. She told them I had a history of violent outbursts. And the police I asked, though, I already knew the answer. They took one look at her bleeding head and my size and they handcuffed me, Lucas said. They didn't ask about the vase. They didn't look at the accounts. They just saw a victim and a perpetrator. They gave me 5 minutes to grab a bag. They issued an emergency temporary restraining order on the spot. She told them the kids weren't safe with me in the house, but then right before they put me in the cruiser, she told the officer she didn't want to press charges, yet she just wanted me gone. And she wanted the kids gone too, because she couldn't handle them in her condition. "So she kicked you and the boys out into the snow," I said, my voice flat. "She threw the boys' coats on the lawn," Lucas said. "She told the officer, 'Let him take the brats, I need to heal.'" The cop looked at me and said I should be grateful she wasn't sending me to jail that night. He told me to get in my car and not come back within 500 feet of the property. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He handed it to me. It was the restraining order. I scanned the legal jargon. Domestic battery, imminent threat, mental instability. It was a masterpiece of fiction. I looked closer at the police report attached to the back. Under the section for injuries to the suspect, the officer had written minor bruising on right forearm consistent with offensive struggle. Consistent with offensive struggle. My blood boiled. They had taken his defensive wound, the mark of him protecting himself, and twisted it into proof of his violence. I looked at my son. He was a builder, a creator. He spent his life making things work, making systems logical. He had no defense against chaos. He had no defense against a wolf who knew how to wear sheep's clothing. He was too gentle for this world, and that gentleness had almost destroyed him. "You didn't fight back," I stated. It wasn't a question. "I was scared, Dad," he admitted. "I was scared that if I yelled, if I got angry, the police would shoot me. I was scared for Leo and Toby. I just wanted to get them away from her." I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights of Chicago twinkled below us, indifferent to our tragedy. Somewhere out there in the suburbs, in a house I helped pay for Brittany, was likely sleeping soundly, confident that she had won. She had the money. She had the house. Oh, she had the victim narrative. She thought she had dismantled my son. But she forgot one variable in her equation. She forgot his father. I turned back to Lucas. He looked broken, defeated, waiting for me to tell him what a mess he had made. "You did the right thing," I said firmly. He looked up, surprised. "What, you got the boys out," I said. "You didn't escalate. You didn't give her the reaction she wanted. You survived. That is rule number 1 of crisis management. Stop the bleeding." I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. I felt him flinch, expecting a blow, and that small reaction made me want to burn the world down. "She thinks you are weak, Lucas," I said. "She thinks you are alone. She thinks I am just a retired old man who fishes in Alaska. She has made a grave tactical error." I picked up the restraining order and folded it neatly, putting it into my pocket. "Tonight you sleep," I commanded. "Tomorrow we stop being victims. Tomorrow we go on the offensive. I am going to make a few calls." Lucas nodded slowly, the exhaustion finally overtaking him. "Dad," he whispered. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said, turning off the living room lamp. "Thank me when we have the money back and she is the one sleeping in a car." I watched him walk to the bedroom, dragging his feet. Then I sat down in the dark, pouring myself another 2 fingers of bourbon. I didn't drink it immediately. I sat there planning. I needed a lawyer who was a shark. I needed a forensic accountant who could trace a digital ghost. And I needed to pay a visit to a house in Highland Park. Brittany wanted to play games with the truth. Fine. I spent 40 years manipulating the truth for Fortune 500 companies. I was about to give her a masterclass. I left the penthouse while the sun was still struggling to rise over Lake Michigan. Lucas and the boys were dead to the world, buried under heavy duvets in the guest room, sleeping the sleep of the exhausted and the safe. I left a note on the kitchen counter telling them to stay put and eat whatever they wanted from the fridge. Then I took the elevator down to the garage. My Ford F-150 felt too rugged for where I was going, but it was perfect for my mood. I was heading to Highland Park. Highland Park is where people go when they want to pretend the rest of the world does not exist. It is a place of manicured lawns, heated driveways, and silent electric cars. It is a place where money whispers instead of shouts. I knew the route by heart because 5 years ago I wrote a check for 40% of the down payment on a colonial-style house on Ravine Drive. I did it because Lucas looked at me with those hopeful eyes and said it was Brittany's dream house. I wanted them to be happy. I wanted my grandsons to have a backyard. I didn't know I was financing a war zone. I pulled into the driveway at 10 in the morning. The snow here had been perfectly cleared, plowed away by private contractors before the residents even woke up. There were 4 other cars parked in the wide circular drive. A Range Rover, a white Porsche Cayenne, and 2 Mercedes SUVs. It looked like a luxury car dealership. My battered truck looked like a scar on a perfect face as I parked it right behind the Porsche, blocking it in. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Less than 12 hours ago, I was looking at my grandsons shivering in a freezing parking lot at O'Hare eating stale crackers. Now I was looking at the house where they were supposed to be safe. Through the large bay windows I could see movement. I could see golden light. I could see life happening as if nothing was wrong. I got out of the truck. The air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke from chimneys. I walked up the stone path that I remembered paying to have relaid last summer because Brittany said the old slate was too uneven for her heels. I didn't knock. I still had a key, a spare one Lucas had given me years ago for emergencies. I figured this counted as an emergency. I unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open. The sound hit me first. Laughter. High-pitched, carefree laughter. Then the smell. Freshly baked quiche, roasting coffee, and the distinct, sugary scent of expensive champagne. I walked into the foyer. To my right, the dining room was transformed. It was a brunch, a lavish, fully catered brunch. There were 6 women sitting around the table, including Brittany. They were dressed in designer athleisure wear and cashmere sweaters, the kind of casual clothing that costs more than a suit. The table was laden with platters of smoked salmon, caviar, fruit towers, and crystal flutes of mimosas. Brittany was standing at the head of the table holding a glass high. She looked immaculate. Her hair was blown out perfectly. Her makeup was flawless. There was no bandage on her head. There was no sign of the trauma she had claimed to the police 48 hours ago. She looked like a queen holding court, so I told him she was saying her voice carrying clear across the room. If you can't handle the pressure of a startup, maybe you aren't the man I thought you were. And then he just snapped. It was terrifying, you guys. I truly feared for my life. The women gasped in unison, a chorus of performative sympathy. "Oh, you poor thing," one of them said. "You are so brave to stay in this house alone." That is when I stepped into the archway of the dining room. My boots were wet with melted snow, leaving dark prints on the hardwood floor. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, a large, gray-haired man in a heavy coat, bringing the winter air in with me. One of the guests saw me first. Her eyes went wide and she dropped her fork. The clatter cut through the room like a gunshot. Brittany turned around, her smile freezing on her face. For a second, she looked confused. Then her survival instinct kicked in. She dropped the champagne flute. It shattered on the floor, splashing orange juice and sparkling wine onto the Persian rug. She brought her hands to her chest, her face contorting into a mask of exaggerated fear. "Harrison," she shrieked. "What are you doing here? How did you get in?" I stepped forward, crunching the broken glass under my boot. The other women shrank back in their chairs, looking from me to her, sensing the sudden violence in the air. "Get out!" Brittany yelled, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and acting. "Are you here to finish what he started? Are you here to threaten me like your son did? Someone call the police. He is violating my privacy." I ignored her. I ignored the gasps of her friends. I ignored the spilled champagne. I looked around the room, taking it in with the eyes of a forensic accountant. I saw the new curtains, heavy silk. I saw the new chandelier, a modern crystal monstrosity that I knew hadn't been there 2 months ago. And then I saw it. Sitting on the cream-colored sofa in the adjacent living room, propped up like a guest of honor, was a handbag. It was orange. It was leather. It had gold hardware. I knew exactly what it was because I had bought one for my late wife for our 30th anniversary. A Hermès Birkin. I walked past Brittany as if she were a ghost. She reached out to grab my arm to stop me, but I shook her off with a shrug of my shoulder. I walked straight to the sofa and picked up the bag. It still had the new leather smell. It was pristine. "Put that down," Brittany screamed, rushing toward me. "That is my personal property. You are stealing." I turned to face her, holding the bag up in the light. The room went dead silent. Her friends were watching, their eyes darting between the bag and my face. "This is a Hermès Birkin 30. I said, my voice calm, cold, and loud enough to be heard in the kitchen. "The current retail price is around $12,000 on the secondary market. Maybe more if you want it immediately." Brittany stopped a few feet away from me, her chest heaving. "So what?" she spat. "My parents bought that for me. It was a gift to cheer me up after the trauma your son put me through." I looked her dead in the eye. I reached into the front pocket of the bag. Brittany froze. She knew what was in there. I pulled out a receipt. It wasn't a gift receipt. It was a standard sales slip from a luxury reseller in downtown Chicago dated 3 days ago. "Your parents didn't buy this, Brittany," I said, reading the slip. "The credit card ending in 4098 bought this. That is the corporate credit card for Lucas's startup. That is the card meant for server costs and payroll." I looked up at the women at the table. They were frozen, their mimosas halfway to their mouths. $12,000, I said to the room. "That is exactly the amount my son told me he needed to pay his 2 lead developers for the last month of work. He was crying because he thought he had failed them. He thought the business was failing. But the business wasn't failing. The payroll was just sitting on this sofa." Brittany's face went from pale to a mottled red. "You don't know what you are talking about," she hissed. "As the CFO, I am entitled to discretionary spending. It is a business expense. Image is important for networking." "Image," I repeated. I took a step toward her, and she took a step back, hitting the edge of the dining table. "My son slept in a Honda Civic last night," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. It was 5 degrees below zero. My 6-year-old grandsons were wrapped in airline blankets because their mother threw their winter coats on the lawn. They were eating crackers they found in the glove compartment. And while they were freezing, you were buying a handbag with the money intended to put food on their table. A gasp went around the room. One of the friends, a woman in a blue tracksuit, stood up slowly. "Brittany," she said softly, "you told us Lucas locked you out of the accounts. You told us he left you with nothing." "He did," Brittany snapped, turning on her friend. "He is lying. Harrison is a liar just like his son. They are trying to frame me. This is financial abuse. He is trying to control me." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound that made everyone flinch. Financial abuse, I said. That is an interesting choice of words. I tossed the bag onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud right next to the platter of smoked salmon. I walked over to the wall. I ran my hand along the texture of the paint. It was smooth, glossy, and had depth. Venetian plaster. You repainted, I noted. Since the last time I was here 3 months ago. This is Venetian plaster. It costs about $100 a square foot to install. You did the whole ground floor. That is easily $15,000. I turned back to her. Where did the money come from, Brittany? The startup has zero revenue. I checked the investor reports this morning. You haven't shipped the product yet. So you are renovating a house you can't afford, buying bags you don't need, and drinking vintage champagne while your husband is homeless. That isn't financial abuse. That is embezzlement. Get out of my house, Brittany screamed. She was shaking now, her composure completely gone. She looked like a cornered animal. I am calling the police. I have a restraining order against Lucas, and I will get one against you too. Call them, I challenged her. Call the police. I will wait. I would love to show them this receipt. I would love to show them the bank statements I pulled this morning. I would love to explain to them why a woman who claims to be terrified for her life is hosting a brunch party 48 hours later. She stared at me, her hand hovering over her phone on the table. She didn't dial. She knew she couldn't. One of the guests picked up her purse. I think I should go, she mumbled. Sit down, Linda, Brittany commanded. Don't let him intimidate you. But Linda didn't sit. She walked to the door. Then another woman stood up. Then another. Within 30 seconds, the room was clearing out. They knew the smell of scandal, and they wanted to be far away from it. Brittany watched her audience leave. Her power evaporated with them. She turned back to me, her eyes filled with pure, unfiltered hatred. You think you are so smart, she said, her voice low and venomous. You think you can just march in here and shame me? You have no idea who you are dealing with. My father will destroy you. Your father, I asked. Richard Caldwell. The man who owns the car dealerships, he will bury you in legal fees, she threatened. He is already filing for full custody of the twins. He is going to prove that Lucas is mentally unfit and that you are an enabler. We are going to take everything, Harrison. The penthouse, your savings, everything. You should have stayed in Alaska. I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the expensive makeup and the designer clothes, I saw a profound emptiness. She wasn't just greedy. She was delusional. She truly believed she was the victim. She truly believed she was entitled to ruin my son because he hadn't made her rich fast enough. I took a step closer, invading her personal space. She flinched, but I didn't touch her. I didn't need to. I didn't come here to threaten you, Brittany, I said softly. I came here to verify a theory. I wanted to know if this was a misunderstanding. I wanted to know if maybe, just maybe, there was a reason for what happened. But now I see. It wasn't a mistake. It was a harvest. You harvested my son. I turned and walked to the door. Enjoy the brunch, I said without looking back. And keep the bag. You are going to need to sell it to pay for your lawyer. I walked out into the cold morning air. My heart was racing, not from fear, but from clarity. I had my answer. This wasn't a marriage dispute. It was a heist. And as I walked to my truck, I saw a black sedan pull into the driveway, blocking my exit. A man in a suit got out. Then an older woman. It was Richard and Patricia Caldwell. The cavalry had arrived, and they didn't look happy. Richard Caldwell stepped out of the black Mercedes sedan like he was stepping onto a showroom floor. He was wearing a camel hair coat that probably cost more than my truck, and his teeth were bleached a shade of white that does not exist in nature. Patricia followed him wrapped in fur, looking at me with the same expression one reserves for a stain on a silk rug. I stood my ground by the tailgate of my pickup, watching them approach. I knew Richard. He owned 12 car dealerships across the state. He was a man who had made a fortune selling lemons to people who couldn't afford them, wrapping predatory loans in smiles and handshakes. Harrison Richard boomed, extending a hand I had no intention of shaking. "You look terrible. Alaska has aged you." I ignored his hand. I ignored the insult. I looked past him to Brittany, who was standing in the doorway of the house, drying her fake tears, looking relieved that her reinforcements had arrived. "I know what you are doing, Richard," I said, my voice low and steady. "I know about the money. I know about the Venetian plaster. I know about the Hermes bag bought with payroll funds." Richard didn't flinch. He didn't look embarrassed. He chuckled, a deep, rehearsed sound that grated on my nerves. "You always were dramatic, Harrison," he said, shaking his head. "That is your problem. You see conspiracies everywhere, just like your son." He took a step closer, invading my personal space, trying to use his height to intimidate me. It didn't work. I have stared down union bosses on strike lines. A car salesman was not going to make me blink. "We need to talk about Lucas," Richard said, his tone shifting from jovial to somber in a split second. "We are very worried about him. His behavior lately has been erratic, violent, paranoid. He is sleeping in a car because your daughter stole his company," I said. "That is not paranoia. That is survival." Richard sighed, looking at Patricia as if to say, "See what we are dealing with." "He is sick, Harrison," Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with poisonous concern. "We have known for months. Brittany tried to hide it to protect his dignity, but we can't ignore it anymore. He hears voices. He thinks people are stealing from him. He invents elaborate stories about bank transfers that never happened. They were building a narrative. I could see the bricks being laid one by one. They weren't just defending Brittany. They were offensively dismantling Lucas's credibility." I pulled the bank statements from my pocket. "The paper trail doesn't lie, Patricia. $200,000 didn't vanish because of voices in his head. It vanished because of wire transfers initiated by your daughter." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Those were authorized transfers to holding accounts," he lied smoothly. "Lucas signed off on them during his manic episodes. He forgets what he does, Harrison. It is tragic." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it out to me. "Read this," he said. "We didn't want to show you, but you leave us no choice." I took the envelope. It was heavy. I opened the clasp and pulled out a stack of medical records. The letterhead was from a private psychiatric facility in the city, signed by a Dr. Holloway. I scanned the pages. The dates went back 6 months. Patient exhibits signs of acute paranoid schizophrenia. Patient reports hallucinations. Patient is a danger to himself and others. Recommended course of action is immediate involuntary commitment. There were notes on sessions Lucas supposedly attended. There were prescriptions for heavy antipsychotics that I knew my son had never taken. "This is fake," I said, looking up at Richard. "Lucas has never met a Dr. Holloway. He works 18 hours a day writing code. When would he have time for weekly therapy sessions?" "He goes when he says he is working," Brittany shouted from the porch. She had regained her confidence now that her parents were shielding her. "He lied to you, Harrison. He lies to everyone." I looked at the signature at the bottom of the diagnosis. It was a scrawl, barely legible. This wasn't just a lie. This was a document forged to strip a man of his rights. They were trying to get a conservatorship. They wanted to do to Lucas what they did to old celebrities. Lock him up, drug him until he drools, and take control of his assets, his intellectual property, and his children. "We are filing the paperwork tomorrow," Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "For the safety of the twins. We are petitioning the court for emergency guardianship. Lucas needs to be in a facility, Harrison. A nice one. We will pay for it. We just want him to get help." I looked at them. The three of them. A tableau of American greed. They stood there in their expensive clothes in front of a house I paid for, holding a fake medical file, telling me they were going to imprison my son for his own good. I realized then that arguing was useless. Logic does not work on predators. If I shouted if I lost my temper, I would just be proving their point. They would tell the police that the madness ran in the family. They would say I was just as unstable as my son. I needed to de-escalate. I needed to get out of there before the police arrived and saw me holding a damning, albeit forged, medical file. I needed to regroup. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump. I let the fight drain out of my face. I forced myself to look defeated. "I didn't know," I said quietly. I looked at the file again. "I didn't know it was this bad." Richard smiled. It was the smile of a shark that just smelled blood in the water. "Of course you didn't," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You were in Alaska. You were disconnected. It isn't your fault, Harrison. You couldn't have stopped it." "So you are taking care of it?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "We are handling everything," Patricia said soothingly. "We have the lawyers, the doctors. We will make sure the boys are raised in a stable environment. You don't need to worry about a thing. Go back to your fishing. Let us handle the heavy lifting." They thought I was breaking. They thought I was the clueless old man Lucas had warned me about. "Okay," I said, handing the file back to Richard. "If he is sick, then he needs help. I will talk to him." "Good," Richard said, tucking the file back into his coat. "That is the sensible decision." I turned to walk to my truck. My boots felt heavy in the snow. I reached the door handle and paused. I looked back at them. They were still standing there, a united front of malice. "Richard Fick," called out. He looked at me, eyebrow raised. "Yes, Harrison." "If he really is crazy," I said, my voice hardening just enough to cut through the winter air, "then I will take care of him. But remember one thing. Hell has plenty of empty seats because all the devils are standing right here in this driveway." Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered quickly. "Drive safe, Harrison," he said dismissively. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. I backed out of the driveway, my eyes scanning the perimeter. That is when I saw it. Parked down the street, half hidden by a snowbank, was a black sedan with tinted windows. It wasn't a neighbor's car. It was idling. As I drove past it, I glanced at the license plate. It was a custom plate. Lex Tal, Lex Talionis, the law of retaliation. I knew that car. It belonged to Miles Sterling, a lawyer known in Chicago as the Undertaker. He didn't handle divorces. He handled corporate liquidations and hostile takeovers. He was the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to bury someone so deep they never saw sunlight again. Why was a corporate shark like Sterling parked outside my son's house? The answer hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just trying to get custody of the kids. They weren't just trying to hide the $200,000. This was bigger, much bigger. Sterling charged $1,000 an hour. You don't hire him to fight over a Hermes bag. You hire him when there are millions on the table. I gripped the steering wheel. Lucas had told me his startup was promising, but he was modest. If the Caldwells had hired Sterling, it meant the software my son was writing was worth a fortune. They weren't trying to lock him up because he was crazy. They were trying to lock him up so they could steal his mind. I stepped on the gas. I needed to get back to the penthouse. I needed to get to Lucas before he did something stupid. And I needed to call Alistair Thorne. The Caldwells had brought a knife to a gunfight, but now I knew they had a cannon waiting in the wings. The war had just begun. I drove away from Highland Park with the taste of bile in my throat. The encounter with the Caldwells had confirmed my worst suspicions. They were not just greedy in-laws. They were organized predators, and seeing Miles Sterling's car parked down the street meant they were predators who had hired a professional executioner. I needed my own monster. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 3 years. It rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Harrison," the voice said. "I was wondering when you would get bored of the salmon in Alaska." "Alistair," I said. "I am not bored. I am at war." Alistair Thorne is a man who makes sharks look like goldfish. He is a specialist in mergers and acquisitions, but that is just the polite title on his business card. In reality, he is a corporate headhunter. He finds the skeletons in the closets of Fortune 500 CEOs and uses them as leverage. We worked together in the 90s cleaning up an oil spill in the Gulf where the liability was in the billions. He saved the company. I saved the town. We understand each other. "I need a favor," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "And I need it fast." "Name it," Alistair said. "I need you to open up the financial life of a man named Richard Caldwell. He owns a chain of car dealerships in the suburbs, Caldwell Automotive Group." "Car dealerships," Alistair sounded disappointed. "Harrison, I am working on a hostile takeover of a pharmaceutical giant. Why do I care about a used car salesman?" "Because he stole $200,000 from me," I said. "And he is trying to commit my son to a mental institution to cover it up. And because he hired Miles Sterling." The line went silent for a moment. Then Alistair let out a low whistle. "Sterling. For a car dealer. That is like hiring a nuclear submarine to go fishing. If Sterling is involved, there is blood in the water. Real money. Not just dealership money." "Exactly," I said. "I want you to dissect Caldwell. I don't want you to look for his profits. I want you to look for his debts. I want you to find the rot. Find the loans he is defaulting on. Find the vendors he isn't paying. Find the mistress he is hiding. Find the leverage, Alistair." "Consider it done," Alistair said, his voice sharpening with interest. "I will put my best forensic team on it. Give me 24 hours. I hung up. I had the legal flank covered. Now I needed to see the crime scene. I drove straight to the industrial park on the west side of the city where Lucas rented his office space. It was a nondescript brick building, the kind that houses dental supply warehouses and struggling tech startups. I pulled into the lot. It was empty. It was Saturday, but for a startup launching a product, Saturday is just another workday. There should have been cars. There should have been life. I walked up to the glass double doors of Suite 104. The logo of my son's company, Logitech Solutions, was stenciled on the glass in modern blue vinyl. I swiped the keycard Lucas had given me 6 months ago when he proudly showed me the space. The light on the reader turned red. Access denied. I tried again. Red. They had canceled the cards. Of course they had. Brittany was thorough. She had locked him out physically before she locked him out financially. I looked around. The parking lot was deserted. There were no cameras on the exterior of this old building. I walked around to the back to the service entrance near the loading dock. It was a standard steel door with a heavy-duty commercial lever lock. I am 70 years old, but my hands are steady. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a small flat toolkit I have carried since my days working in unstable regions in South America. A tension wrench and a rake pick. I knelt in the snow. The lock was cold and stiff, but it was a standard mechanism. I applied tension. I felt the pins bind. 1, 2, 3. A soft click echoed in the silence. The door groaned open. I stepped inside. The air in the hallway was stale and cold. The heating had been turned down or off. I walked down the corridor to the main office floor. It was a ghost town. The desks were there, 12 of them arranged in an open-plan layout. But they were bare. No monitors. No keyboards. No personal photos. No half-drunk coffee cups. It looked like the crew of a ship had simply vanished into thin air. I walked to the center of the room. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. I went to the server room in the back. The door was open. I stepped in and flipped the light switch. The server rack stood in the corner, a tall metal skeleton. It was empty. The blades were gone. The hard drives were gone. Wires dangled from the back of the rack like severed nerves. This wasn't an eviction. This was a liquidation. They hadn't just fired the staff. They had stripped the company for parts. They had taken the hardware, the data, the intellectual property. They had erased my son's work. I felt a surge of nausea. Lucas had spent 3 years building this architecture. He had talked to me about the redundancy protocols, the latency speeds. He loved this machine, and they had gutted it. I walked back out into the main office. I was looking for something, anything that could tell me where they went. That is when I saw it. In the corner near the break room kitchenette was a blue recycling bin. It was overflowing. Criminals are often arrogant. They assume no one will look. They assume they have won. They think the trash is a black hole where evidence disappears. I walked over to the bin. It was filled with shredded paper, cross-cut shreds. Hard to read, but not impossible if you have the patience. But right on top, resting on the pile of white confetti, were a few crumpled balls of paper that hadn't been shredded. Maybe the machine jammed. Maybe they got lazy. I put on a pair of latex gloves from my pocket. I picked up the crumpled papers and smoothed them out on the nearest desk. They were invoices. I scanned them. Catering bills, office supply receipts, mundane things. But then I found one that made me pause. It was an invoice dated 3 weeks ago. The header read, Blue Horizon LLC. The address was a P.O. box in Delaware. The amount was $50,000. The description of services was simply listed as strategic consulting. I frowned. Lucas's company was a logistics software firm. They built code. Why were they paying $50,000 to a consulting firm in Delaware? And why Blue Horizon? It sounded like a shell company. It sounded like a front. I dug deeper into the bin. I found another crumpled invoice. This one was for $25,000. Same payee. Blue Horizon LLC. $75,000 in less than a month. That was nearly half of the seed money I had given Lucas. I took out my phone and photographed the documents. Then I carefully folded them and put them in my inside pocket. I looked at the invoice again. There was a phone number at the bottom, small print, barely legible. I memorized it. I left the office the way I came, locking the back door behind me. As I walked to my truck, I pulled up the corporate registry for Delaware on my phone. I searched for Blue Horizon LLC. It was registered 6 months ago. The registered agent was a generic legal service, but the manager listed was a holding company based in Nevada. It was a Russian nesting doll of anonymity, designed to hide the owner, designed to hide the money flow. But they had made a mistake. They always do. On the second invoice under the billing reference, there was a handwritten note in blue ink. Just 3 words. Aspen Property Maintenance. I stopped in my tracks. Aspen. Richard Caldwell had a ski chalet in Aspen. He bragged about it constantly. He posted photos of it on Facebook every winter. I connected the dots. The money didn't go to consultants. It didn't go to developers. It went to a shell company. And that shell company was paying for maintenance on a property in Aspen. They were funneling the startup capital out of the company to pay for their personal real estate. It was embezzlement clear as day. And they were sloppy. I sat in my truck and called Alistair back. I have a name for you, I said when he answered. Blue Horizon LLC, and I have a connection to Aspen. Interesting, Alistair said. I just pulled Richard Caldwell's credit report. Harrison, the man is bleeding. He is over-leveraged on every dealership. He has a balloon payment due on a commercial loan in 3 months, and he doesn't have the cash. So he raided his son-in-law's company to pay the mortgage on his vacation home. I said, the picture becoming clearer. It looks like he raided the piggy bank to keep the lights on, Alistair agreed. But Harrison, $5 million in debt is a lot of lights. 200,000 from Lucas wouldn't save him. It would just buy him a few weeks. He needs a bigger score. He is trying to sell the software, I realized. That is why they hired Sterling. That is why they want custody. They want the intellectual property. They want to sell Lucas's code to a competitor to cover their debts. Exactly, Alistair said. And if they get guardianship over Lucas, they get his signature. They get to sell his life's work and call it asset management. I looked back at the empty building. They were going to sell my son out to save their own skins. Find out who they are talking to, I told Alistair. Find out who wants to buy the software. I am on it, Alistair said. And Harrison. Yes. If you find that shell company, don't just take a picture. Burn it to the ground. I hung up. I had the evidence of the theft. I had the motive. Now I needed a witness who could tie Brittany directly to the transfers. I needed someone on the inside who had been discarded. I remembered Lucas mentioning a secretary. Sarah. He said Brittany fired her 2 months ago for asking too many questions. I started the engine. I had to find Sarah, and I had a feeling that $5,000 in cash would jog her memory better than any subpoena. The hunt was on. Finding Sarah wasn't difficult. People leave trails, especially when they are desperate. Lucas had mentioned her full name once, Sarah Miller, and said she lived in Cicero. A quick search of recent employment records through a contact of mine revealed she was now working at a discount grocery store called Price Right, 10 miles south of the city. It was a steep fall for a woman with a finance degree, but that is what happens when you get caught in the blast radius of a family like the Caldwells. They don't just fire you, they blackball you. I parked my truck in the cracked asphalt lot of the grocery store at 7 in the evening. It was dark, and the yellow glow of the streetlights did little to cut through the gloom. I watched the entrance. 15 minutes later, a woman in a red vest walked out. She looked older than the 26 years Lucas had described. Her shoulders were slumped, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she was smoking a cigarette with the intensity of someone who needed it to breathe. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward her. The wind was biting, but she didn't seem to notice. She was staring at the ground, lost in her own misery. "Sarah," I said. She jumped, dropping the cigarette. Her hand went to her purse, probably clutching a bottle of pepper spray. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes went wide with recognition, then fear. "Mr. Stone," she stammered. "Please, I don't want any trouble. Brittany told me if I talked to anyone, she would sue me for violating my non-disclosure agreement. She said she would ruin me." I held up my hands, palms open. "I am not here for Brittany, Sarah. I am here for Lucas." "Lucas." She blinked, confused. "Is he okay? I heard rumors. I heard he had a breakdown." "He didn't have a breakdown," I said, moving closer so we didn't have to shout over the wind. "He was robbed. And you know exactly how it happened." She took a step back, shaking her head. I can't talk about this. I need this job, Mr. Stone. It is barely enough to pay rent, but it is all I have. The Caldwells called every firm in town. They told everyone I was incompetent. They told everyone I stole from the petty cash. They destroyed her reputation to ensure her silence. It was a classic move. I reached into my inside jacket pocket. Sarah flinched, expecting a subpoena or a threat. Instead, I pulled out a thick, white envelope. I held it out to her. "Take it," I said. "What is it, severance?" I replied. "The severance pay you earned but never got." She hesitated, then reached out with a trembling hand and took the envelope. She opened the flap. Inside was a stack of $100 bills. $5,000. It wasn't a fortune to the Caldwells, but to a woman making minimum wage in a grocery store, it was a lifeline. Why, she asked, looking up at me with tears welling in her eyes. Why are you doing this? Because I know you didn't steal anything, Sarah. I know you were just following orders. And I know you are scared. She clutched the envelope to her chest. I am terrified, she whispered. She is not normal. She screams, and then 2 minutes later she acts like nothing happened. And her father, he looked at me like I was an insect. I nodded. I knew the look well. I need you to tell me about Blue Horizon, I said. Sarah froze. The color drained from her face. How do you know that name? I found the invoices in the trash, I lied. They were sloppy. Sarah looked around the empty parking lot, checking for shadows. It is a shell, she said, her voice barely audible. Brittany made me set it up. She told me it was for tax optimization strategies. She said we needed to move the seed money into a holding entity to avoid liability before the product launch. And you believed her? At first, yes. But then the invoices started coming in. They weren't for servers or developers. They were for property management, landscaping, interior design. For a property in Aspen, I guessed. Sarah nodded. A chalet. I saw the deed, Mr. Stone. Brittany made me scan it. The owner of record is Blue Horizon LLC, but the beneficiaries are Richard and Patricia Caldwell. They used Lucas's startup capital to make the down payment and the first 6 months of mortgage payments on a vacation home. There it was, the confirmation. They had cannibalized my son's future to buy a ski house. Why didn't you tell Lucas? I asked gently. I tried, Sarah said, a tear rolling down her cheek. That is why I got fired. I went to Brittany first. I told her I couldn't process these payments anymore because they were fraudulent. I told her I was going to tell Lucas if she didn't stop, and she laughed at me. She told me Lucas was an idiot who stared at screens all day. She said he didn't know the difference between a balance sheet and a grocery list. Then she told me if I said one word to him, she would tell the police I embezzled the money myself. She said her father had judges in his pocket. She said she would put me in jail. I felt a cold rage tightening my chest. They had weaponized the legal system against a young woman just trying to do her job. She fired me 10 minutes later, Sarah continued. She had security escort me out. She didn't let me take my personal files. She didn't let me say goodbye to Lucas. I placed a hand on her shoulder. You are safe now, Sarah. I am going to stop them. But I need proof. My word against theirs isn't enough. I need something concrete. Sarah bit her lip. She looked at the envelope in her hand, then at my truck, then back at me. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver USB drive attached to a keychain with a fuzzy pink bear. I knew she would come after me, Sarah said. I knew she would lie about why she fired me. So I started recording our meetings, just on my phone in my pocket. Illinois is a two-party consent state, I know, but I was scared. I needed insurance. She handed me the drive. The last file, she said. It is from the day she fired me. It is everything you need. I took the drive. It felt heavier than the money I had just given her. Thank you, Sarah. You just saved a family. I got back into my truck and plugged the USB drive into my laptop. I scrolled to the last audio file. I put on my headphones and pressed play. The audio was muffled at first to the sound of fabric rubbing against a microphone, then a door slamming. Then Brittany's voice, clear and shrill. I don't pay you to have a conscience, Sarah. I pay you to move the money where I tell you to move it. Then Sarah's voice shaking. But Brittany, this is investor capital. You can't use it for personal real estate. It is fraud. Lucas needs this money for the payroll. Then a laugh. Cold, dismissive. Lucas, Brittany's voice sneered. Just transfer the money. That idiot Lucas only knows how to stare at screens. He doesn't know how to read financial reports. He thinks he is a CEO, but he is just a cash cow I am milking until dry. Do you think he would even notice he trusts me because he is pathetic? Now send the wire to Blue Horizon or get out of my office." The recording ended with the sound of Sarah sobbing. I took off the headphones. My hands were gripping the steering wheel. That recording was the nail in the coffin. It proved intent. It proved malice. It proved she thought my son was nothing more than a resource to be exploited. She called him a cash cow. She called him pathetic. I looked out at the dark parking lot. Sarah was getting into her old sedan, wiping her eyes. She was a good person who had been chewed up by the Caldwell machine. I started my truck. I had the invoices. I had the witness. I had the recording. I had the motive. Now all I needed was to wait for them to make their move. And I knew exactly what that move would be. They were desperate. They had a mortgage in Aspen they couldn't pay, and a debt pile that was about to collapse. They would come for the rest of the assets. They would try to take the intellectual property. I picked up my phone and called Alistair. "I have the smoking gun," I said. Brittany on tape admitting to the embezzlement and calling Lucas a cash cow. "Excellent," Alistair said. "But Harrison, you need to brace yourself. My forensic team just finished with the Caldwell financials. It is worse than we thought. They aren't just in debt. They are insolvent." "Explain." "They owe $5 million to a regional bank on a balloon note that is already in default," Alistair said. "They have been hiding it with creative accounting, but the bank is about to foreclose on everything. The dealerships, the house, the Aspen chalet. They are weeks away from total ruin." "That explains the desperation," I said. "That explains why they stole the seed money. It was a stopgap, exactly. But $200,000 didn't fix the hole. It just plugged it for a month. They need a massive infusion of cash to save the dealerships, and there is only one asset left that is worth that kind of money." "Lucas's software," I said. "Precisely. I found emails, Harrison. Richard Caldwell has been in talks with Apex Logistics, your son's biggest competitor. He is trying to sell them the source code for $2 million. He is pitching it as an acquisition of a distressed asset. He is selling my son's life work to pay for his bad car loans," I said, my voice flat. "Yes. And the closing date for the sale? It is next Friday. That is why they need the guardianship. They need legal authority to sign the transfer papers because Lucas won't sell." I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was Wednesday. We had 48 hours before they tried to sell a company they didn't own. "Let them try," I said. "I have a plan." "Alistair, I need you to find out who holds that $5 million note." "Which bank?" "First Merchants Bank of Illinois," Alistair said. "Why?" "Because I said putting the truck in gear. I am going to do what I do best. I am going to manage a crisis. I am going to buy that debt. You are going to what I am going to become Richard Caldwell's bank," I said, "and then I am going to call in the loan." I hung up and drove toward the city. The game had changed. I wasn't just defending my son anymore. I was buying the battlefield. The phone call from Alistair came at 6 in the morning, shattering the fragile peace of the penthouse. The sun wasn't even up over Lake Michigan, but the war was already raging. I picked up on the first ring, my instincts already screaming that the Caldwells had made their next move. "They went nuclear," Harrison Alistair said, without a preamble. His voice was tight, the tone of a man who had been reading legal filings all night. "They filed an emergency ex parte motion in family court an hour ago. They aren't just asking for temporary custody anymore. They are petitioning for the permanent termination of Lucas's parental rights." I felt the blood pound in my ears. Termination. That is the legal equivalent of a death sentence for a father. It means you are erased. It means you are a stranger to your own children. "On what grounds?" I asked, walking to the window looking down at the frozen city. "Gross negligence," Alistair read. "Substance abuse. violent instability. And Harrison, they dragged you into it too. They filed a motion for third-party liability. They are claiming you are funding a known abuser. They are calling it negligent entrustment. They want you to pay for the children's support, but they want Brittany to have total control over the funds, because according to their filing, you are suffering from age-related cognitive decline. I laughed a short, bitter bark. So I am the senile old man bankrolling the crazy son. That is their narrative. It is working, Alistair warned. I just got a call from my contact at the bank. Your personal accounts have been flagged for suspicious activity. A law firm representing the Caldwells sent a letter alleging you are dissipating assets to hide them from the family court. The bank froze your liquid checking account pending a compliance review. They were trying to choke us. They knew I had resources, so they were using the bureaucracy to cut off my supply lines. It was a smart move. It was a Miles Sterling move. Fix the bank, I said. I don't care who you have to threaten. Unfreeze my money. I am on it, Alistair said. But Harrison, keep a leash on Lucas. If he does anything at all that looks aggressive or unstable, they will use it. They have private investigators watching him. They are waiting for him to snap. I hung up and turned to the guest room. The door was ajar. My stomach dropped. I pushed the door open. The beds were empty. The twins were gone, but their shoes were still there. Lucas's bed was made, but his coat was missing. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my discipline. I ran to the kitchen. There was no note. I checked the front door. It was unlocked. Lucas wasn't a fighter. He was a father who had been stripped of his children, and desperate men do stupid things. I grabbed my keys and ran for the elevator. I knew exactly where he was going. It was a Wednesday. It was 8 in the morning. He was going to the one place he knew the boys would be shown. Their private elementary school in Highland Park. I drove my truck like I was fleeing a disaster zone. I broke speed limits. I ran a red light. I needed to get there before he did something that would put him in handcuffs for real. The Caldwells had set a trap, and my son was walking right into it. I pulled up to the school 20 minutes later. It was a fortress of brick and iron gates surrounded by snow-covered hedges. Parents were dropping off their children in a line of luxury SUVs. I scanned the perimeter. There, by the north fence, hidden behind a large oak tree, was a figure in a gray coat. It was Lucas. He was gripping the iron bars of the fence, his face pressed against the cold metal, watching the playground. I jumped out of the truck and started running toward him. The snow was deep, slowing me down. "Lucas," I hissed, trying not to draw attention. He didn't hear me. He was fixated on the playground. I followed his gaze. I saw Leo and Toby. They were walking into the school building, holding hands with Brittany. She was wearing sunglasses and a white coat, looking every inch the grieving, courageous mother. She stopped and said something to a security guard pointing toward the street. She knew. She knew he would come. I saw the security guard reach for his radio. I saw a police cruiser that was parked discreetly at the corner turn its lights on. Silent roll-up. They were hunting him. I reached Lucas just as the cruiser turned the corner. I didn't ask him to leave. I grabbed him by the collar of his coat and yanked him backward behind the tree. "Dad!" He gasped, trying to pull away. "They are right there. I just want to wave." "Shut up," I growled. I dragged him through the snow, keeping the tree between us and the police car. The cruiser rolled past the spot where he had been standing 10 seconds ago. The officer slowed down, scanning the fence line, then continued on. We scrambled into my truck. I started the engine and pulled away, slowly blending into the traffic. Only when we were 3 blocks away did I let out the breath I had been holding. I looked over at Lucas. He was shivering, tears streaming down his face. He looked broken. He looked like a child who had lost his mother. "I just wanted to see them, Dad," he sobbed. "I just wanted them to know I am still here." Brittany told them I abandoned them. I know she did. I need to tell them I didn't leave. I drove in silence until we reached a deserted parking lot behind a strip mall. I put the truck in park. I turned off the engine. I turned to my son. The anger I felt wasn't at him, but I needed him to feel it. I needed to shock him out of this spiral of self-pity. Lucas, look at me. He turned his tear-stained face toward me. I am sorry, Dad. I just... Crack. I slapped him. It wasn't a brutal blow, but it was sharp, stinging. It was the kind of slap you give a hysterical soldier on the battlefield to keep him from getting his squad killed. Lucas froze. His hand went to his cheek. He looked at me with total shock. He had never been hit by me in his life. Listen to me, I said, my voice low and dangerous. And listen good. You almost went to jail today. You almost gave Brittany exactly what she wanted. If that cop had found you by the fence, do you know what the headline would be tomorrow? Stalker husband violates restraining order at children's school. You would lose them forever. Lucas stared at me, his lip trembling. Tears do not save children, Lucas, I said, leaning in close. Love does not save children. In this world, in this legal system, the only thing that saves your children is winning. Do you understand me? You have to win. But I can't, he whispered. They have the money. They have the lawyers. They have the lies. And we have the truth, I said. But the truth is useless if you act like a victim. You are not a victim anymore. You are a combatant. Stop crying for yourself and start fighting for them. I reached into the back seat and grabbed a bottle of water. I threw it at him. Wash your face, I ordered. We are going to see Alistair, and you are going to show him the source code. You are going to show him exactly what they are trying to steal. Because while you were crying at a fence, I found out why they are doing this. Lucas wiped his face. He took a drink of water. I saw a change in his eyes. The shock of the slap had cleared the fog of depression. A spark of anger was finally lighting up. Why, he asked. Why are they doing this? Because they are broke, I said, and because they are trying to sell your mind to pay for their mistakes. Lucas straightened up in the seat. Sell my mind. They are trying to sell your software to Apex Logistics, I said, for $2 million. They closed the deal next Friday. That is why they need you locked up. They need your signature or a court order that lets them sign for you. Lucas's jaw tightened. Apex. That code isn't finished. It is proprietary. It is encrypted on my private server. They can't sell it. They don't have the keys. They don't know that I said starting the engine. They think they own the company, so they think they own the code. They are selling a box they can't open. Lucas looked out the window, but this time he wasn't looking at nothing. He was calculating. He was the engineer again. If they try to transfer the assets, he said, his voice steadying, they will realize the repository is empty. The IP isn't on the company servers. It is on a decentralized blockchain node I set up in my basement 3 years ago. Good, I said, pulling back onto the road. Then let's go make sure they never find the key. We drove back toward the city. The dynamic in the truck had shifted. I wasn't just driving a broken man anymore. I was driving a partner. The slap had hurt, but it had cauterized the wound. Lucas wasn't crying anymore. He was thinking. And a thinking engineer is a dangerous thing for a car salesman to fight. We are going to win this, Dad, he asked, looking at me. I gripped the wheel. We aren't just going to win, son. We are going to foreclose on their entire existence. We arrived at Alistair Thorne's office building in the financial district just as the morning rush hour was clearing. The building was a monolith of black glass and steel, a fitting fortress for a man who tore corporations apart for a living. I parked the truck in the underground garage next to the rows of pristine Audis and Teslas. My Ford looked like a tank parked among toys. Lucas was quiet now. The slap had done its work. The hysteria was gone, replaced by a sullen, focused intensity. He had his laptop bag over his shoulder, the one thing Brittany hadn't managed to throw onto the lawn because it was always attached to him. We took the elevator to the 35th floor. Alistair was waiting for us in a conference room that cost more than my first house. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't offer sympathy. He pointed to a chair for Lucas and looked at me. "The $5 million note is in play, Harrison." Alistair said, his voice clipped. "I have a contact at First Merchants Bank. The loan officer is terrified. The Caldwells have missed 3 covenants. The bank wants out. If you bring cash, they will sell you the debt by noon tomorrow." "Good," I said. "Prepare the liquidity. I will sign whatever you need." "But before we buy the debt," I said, turning to Lucas, "we need to know exactly what the collateral is worth." I sat down next to my son. He opened his laptop. The screen glowed with lines of code that looked like a foreign language to me. "Lucas," I said, "I need you to be very precise. Brittany and her father are trying to sell your company to Apex Logistics for $2 million. Is the software worth that much?" Lucas didn't look up from the screen. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "It is worth 10 times that," he said quietly. I looked at Alistair. He raised an eyebrow. "Explain," I said. Lucas stopped typing. He took a deep breath and looked at me. For the first time in days, he didn't look like a victim. He looked like the smartest man in the room. "The logistics industry is broken, Dad," he said. "Everyone is trying to solve the last-mile problem. How to get a package from the distribution center to the door efficiently. Apex uses a static routing algorithm. It plans the route in the morning and sticks to it. And mine is dynamic," Lucas said. "It uses real-time traffic data, weather patterns, and even driver biometrics to adjust the route every 30 seconds. It saves 12% on fuel and increases delivery density by 20%. He looked at Alistair. "For a company like Apex, a 20% increase in density is worth $50 million a year in pure profit. $2 million is a steal. It is a fire sale." "So Richard Caldwell knows what he has," I said. "No." Lucas shook his head. "Richard thinks it is just a better map. He doesn't understand the math. He just knows Apex wants it, and he needs quick cash to pay his debts." I leaned back in the leather chair. This was the motive: greed and desperation. They were selling a diamond for the price of glass because they needed to pay off a gambling debt. "But there is a problem," Alistair interjected. He tapped a file folder on the table. "The Caldwells have physical possession of the office. They have the servers. They have the hard drives. If they sell to Apex, they hand over the physical assets. Apex takes the servers, plugs them in, and they have the code." Lucas let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound I hadn't heard from him before. It was arrogant. "No, they don't," he said. We both looked at him. "Brittany fired me," Lucas said. "She locked me out of the bank accounts. She took my keys. She took the office. She thinks she took the company." He turned the laptop around so we could see the screen. It showed a complex diagram of nodes and connections. "But Brittany is a CFO," Lucas said, his voice dripping with disdain. "She looks at a server rack and sees a computer. She doesn't understand that a server is just a box. The value isn't the metal. It is the ghost inside the machine." "What are you saying, son?" I asked. "I am saying that 6 months ago when you gave me the seed money, I didn't trust the landlord's security system," Lucas said. "And honestly, I didn't trust the cloud providers with the core algorithm. It is too valuable. So I built a decentralized storage protocol." He pointed to a blinking green dot on the screen. "The servers in the office. The ones Brittany and Richard are guarding right now, they are empty. Dad, they are just front-end processors. They run the user interface. They make the pretty buttons work. They handle the login screen and the customer database. And the brain I asked. The algorithm. The thing that saves $50 million a year." Lucas tapped his temple. It is encrypted, he said, sharded into 1,000 pieces and stored on a private blockchain node. And where is the node? Alistair asked, leaning forward. It is not in the office, Lucas said. It is in the basement of your penthouse, Dad. I set up a small server tower next to your wine fridge last Christmas. I told you it was a media server for your movies. I stared at him. I remembered that black box. I thought it was for streaming old westerns. So let me get this straight, I said slowly, a smile beginning to form on my face. Brittany and Richard are sitting on a pile of hardware that can show a login screen but can't actually route a single truck exactly, Lucas said. Without the private key which is in my head and on this laptop, those servers are just expensive space heaters. The code isn't there. Alistair started to laugh. It was a low, dark chuckle. This is beautiful, Alistair said. They are selling a car with no engine. They are committing fraud, I corrected him. Corporate fraud. If Richard Caldwell signs a contract with Apex, promising to deliver the source code and then hands them blank servers, Apex will crucify him, Alistair said. They will sue him for breach of contract fraud and damages. They will bury him. And Richard doesn't know, I asked Lucas. He has no idea, Lucas said. He probably had an IT guy look at the servers, saw the lights blinking, saw the login screen, and assumed it was all there. You have to run the compilation script to see that the core library is missing. You have to be an engineer to know it is a hollow shell. I looked at my son. The boy who I thought was too weak for this world had just pulled off the greatest defensive maneuver I had ever seen. He hadn't fought back with fists. He had fought back with architecture. He had built a trap door into his life's work, and his wife had fallen right through it. So what do we do? Lucas asked. Do we tell them? Do we warn Apex? I looked at Alistair. Alistair looked at me. We shared a look that only two old warhorses understand. The look of seeing an enemy walking into a minefield. No, I said softly. We don't tell them a thing. Lucas looked confused. But Dad, if they sign the deal, they commit a felony, I said. If they sign the deal, they take $2 million from a major corporation in exchange for vapor. That is wire fraud. That is grand larceny. We let them proceed. Alistair agreed. We let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff. We let Richard Caldwell believe he has saved his empire. We let Brittany believe she has won. And then Lucas asked. And then I said, standing up. Then we spring the trap. I walked to the window of the conference room. The city looked different now. It didn't look like a cold, hostile place. It looked like a chessboard. And for the first time in days, I knew exactly where the king was. Lucas, I said, turning back to him. Keep that laptop safe. That is your leverage. That is your future. Alistair, call the bank. Buy the debt. I want to own Richard Caldwell by tomorrow morning. What about the custody hearing? Lucas asked, his anxiety returning. What about the boys? I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. The custody hearing is where we end this, I said. We are going to let them walk into that courtroom thinking they are holding a royal flush. They are going to think I am a senile old man and you are a mental patient. They are going to be arrogant. They are going to be cruel. I tightened my grip on his shoulder. And then when they ask for everything, we are going to show them that they own nothing. Not the company, not the code, not the house, and certainly not my grandsons. Lucas nodded. He closed his laptop. The click sounded like a gun being cocked. Let's do it, he said. We walked out of the office. The sun was fully up now, reflecting off the glass towers. The storm had passed. The air was clear and cold. I had 24 hours to raise $5 million cash to buy a bad debt. I had 24 hours to prepare for a mediation that was really an ambush. Brittany wanted to play the victim fine. Richard wanted to play the tycoon fine. I was about to teach them both the difference between price and value. They knew the price of everything from a Hermes bag to a software company, but they didn't know the value of the man they had crossed. They were about to learn. Alistair projected a spreadsheet onto the glass wall of the conference room. It was a spiderweb of red lines and negative numbers. I stood up and walked closer, my eyes scanning the rows of data that told the true story of Richard Caldwell. To the outside world, Richard was a pillar of the community, a man who sponsored Little League teams and drove a new Mercedes every 6 months. But looking at these numbers, I saw what he really was. He was a corpse walking. "This is a financial autopsy," Alistair said, tapping the glass. "Caldwell Automotive Group is technically insolvent. They have 12 dealerships, but they don't own the land for any of them. They lease the lots and the inventory. It is all floor plan financing. The cars belong to the bank, not him." I looked at the bottom line. It was ugly. "He is bleeding cash," I said. "He is hemorrhaging," Alistair corrected. "He expanded too fast 3 years ago. He bought 4 new locations right before interest rates hiked. Now his debt service is eating him alive. Look at this line here. This is a commercial loan with First Merchants Bank. $5 million. I squinted at the terms. It was a balloon note, a dangerous type of loan where you pay only interest for a few years and then the entire principal comes due at once. It matured 2 months ago, I noted. "Exactly," Alistair said. "And he missed the payment. He missed the extension fee. And he has violated 3 separate loan covenants regarding liquidity ratios. Harrison, in the banking world, this is a 5-alarm fire. The bank has classified this as a non-performing asset. They are terrified they are going to have to write it off." "So Richard is desperate," I said, turning away from the screen. "He isn't just greedy. He is drowning." "That explains everything," Lucas said from the table. His voice was quiet, but he was following the logic. "The $200,000 from the startup account. That wasn't for a vacation." "No," I said. "That was payroll for his own staff. Or maybe it was to pay the interest on the Aspen house to keep the bank from seizing it immediately. He stole your seed money just to buy himself another 30 days of air. It was a Ponzi scheme of personal finance. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and my son was Peter." "But 200,000 is a drop in the bucket against 5 million, Alistair pointed out. "It stops the bleeding for a moment, but it doesn't cure the disease. Richard needs a miracle. He needs a massive injection of capital to pay off the balloon note and restructure his empire. If he doesn't get it by the end of the month, the bank seizes the dealerships, the cars, his house, everything. He goes from being a millionaire to being homeless. And that is where Apex comes in," I said. Alistair swiped his finger on his tablet, bringing up a new document on the wall. It was an email chain. The subject line read, "Acquisition Target Alpha." "He has been talking to Apex Logistics for 3 months, Alistair said. He approached them. He pitched them a story about a brilliant but troubled startup that was ready to be acquired. He told them the founder your son was looking for an exit due to health reasons." "Health reasons," Lucas scoffed. "That is why they need the medical records. That is why they need me in an institution. If I am incapacitated, Brittany gets power of attorney. She signs the sale. And the price I asked." $2 million, Alistair said. "It is a fire sale price for the technology, but it is exactly enough cash for Richard to walk into First Merchants Bank, slap it on the desk, and renegotiate his debt. It saves his skin." I stared at the email. It was dated yesterday. They were moving fast. They wanted to close next Friday. "They aren't just stealing a company," I said, my voice cold. "They are harvesting my son's organs to keep their own dying body alive." They looked at Lucas and didn't see a person. They saw a check for $2 million. This is why they hired Miles Sterling, I realized aloud. Sterling isn't cheap. He probably demanded a huge retainer. They must have used the last of the stolen $200,000 to pay him. They are betting everything on this gamble. If they get custody of Lucas, they get the money. If they don't, they lose everything. It is a desperate Hail Mary, Alistair agreed. But it is dangerous. Desperate people don't follow rules. They don't care about collateral damage. I looked at Lucas. He was pale, but he wasn't shaking anymore. The reality of the situation had hardened him. He wasn't dealing with a bad marriage anymore. He was dealing with a corporate raid. So what do we do? Lucas asked. Do we show this to the judge? Do we prove they are broke? We could, Alistair said. But family court is slow. Judges give people second chances. Richard will claim he has a liquidity problem, not a solvency problem. He will say the sale of the company is a prudent financial move for the family. He will spin it. No, I said. I don't want to argue with them in front of a judge. I don't want to debate whether they are good grandparents. I want to end this. I walked back to the glass wall and stared at the red numbers of the $5 million loan. I spent 30 years in the oil industry. I managed crises for companies that had accidents in the middle of the ocean. I learned one thing very early on. When a fire is burning out of control, you don't throw water on it. You starve it of oxygen. Richard Caldwell needs oxygen, I said. His oxygen is credit. He exists because the bank lets him exist. I turned to Alistair. You said the bank wants out. Desperately, Alistair confirmed. They have this loan on their books as toxic. The loan officer who approved it is probably afraid for his job. If someone walked in there and offered to take this headache off their hands, they would roll out the red carpet. Then let's go shopping, I said. Lucas looked at me confused. Dad, what are you talking about? I am talking about leverage, son. In the corporate world, debt is not just a liability. It is a chain. And whoever holds the chain owns the dog. I looked at Alistair. How much cash can I liquidate by tomorrow morning? Alistair did some mental math. Between your investment accounts, the bonds, and the equity line on the penthouse, you could pull together maybe 4 million liquid. It is tight. I have another $1 million in the offshore trust from the Venezuela settlement, I said. Wire it. I want $5 million in a certified draft by 9 a.m. You are going to buy his debt, Alistair said, a slow smile spreading across his face. You are going to buy the loan from First Merchants. I am not just going to buy it, I said. I am going to buy it at a discount. If it is a non-performing asset, the bank will take 80 cents on the dollar just to clear the books. I will offer them $4 million for the $5 million note. They will take it. And once you own the note, Lucas asked. Once I own the note, I become the bank, I said. I step into their shoes. I inherit all the rights of the original lender. I pointed to the clause on the screen that listed the covenants. He has breached the contract 3 times, I said. That means the loan is in default. That means the lender has the right to accelerate the debt. Accelerate, Lucas asked. It means I can demand the full $5 million immediately, I explained. Not next year, not next month, right now. And if he can't pay, which we know he can't, I have the right to foreclose. I can seize the collateral. I looked at the list of collateral attached to the loan. I can seize the dealership inventory, I said. I can seize the accounts receivable. I can seize his personal guarantee, which includes his house in Highland Park, and I can seize the vacation home in Aspen. I looked at Lucas. By tomorrow afternoon, I won't just be your father. I will be Richard Caldwell's owner. He thinks he is a big man because he has a shiny suit and a lawyer. But he is living in a house built on a loan he can't pay. I am going to pull the foundation out from under him. Alistair was already typing on his phone. I am setting up the meeting with the bank's VP of Risk Management. He will be thrilled. This cleans up his quarterly report perfectly. Good, I said. I looked at the time. It was almost noon. The mediation hearing, the one where they planned to strip Lucas of his rights and force me to pay for it, was scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. We have 26 hours, I said. 26 hours to become the shark that eats the shark. Lucas stood up. He looked at the screen at the numbers that represented the destruction of the people who had hurt him. They did this for money, he said softly. They destroyed my family for numbers on a screen. Yes, I said, and they are going to die by those same numbers. I put on my coat. I felt lighter than I had in days. The anger was still there, but it wasn't hot anymore. It was cold. It was precise. It was a weapon. Let's go to the bank, Alistair, I said. I want to buy a car dealership chain. Or rather, I want to buy the ruins of one. We left the conference room. The plan was set. We weren't going into that mediation room as victims pleading for mercy. We were going in as executioners holding the axe. Richard Caldwell wanted a war over assets. He didn't realize that I was about to buy the ground he was standing on. First Merchants Bank was a fortress of limestone and glass in the center of the financial district, a place designed to make you feel small and the money feel big. We walked in at 10 in the morning. The lobby was hushed, the air conditioned to a sterile chill. Alistair led the way, his briefcase swinging with the rhythm of a man who knows exactly where the bodies are buried. I followed, keeping my face impassive, though inside my chest my heart was hammering, a rhythm of pure adrenaline. I was about to gamble everything I had earned in 40 years of crisis management on a single hand of poker. We were ushered into the office of the Vice President of Risk Management, a man named Mr. Kincaid. He looked tired. His tie was loosened slightly, and there were stacks of files on his desk that looked like they were waiting to topple over. He looked like a man who was drowning in bad paper. When Alistair introduced us, Kincaid eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. He didn't see Harrison Stone, the retired fixer. He saw a potential lifeline. "Gentlemen," Kincaid said, gesturing to the chairs. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Alistair told me you were interested in a specific asset in our portfolio." "We aren't here for small talk, Mr. Kincaid," Alistair said, placing his leather folio on the desk. "We are here to discuss the Caldwell Automotive Group commercial loan, loan number 7094, the $5 million balloon note that is currently 90 days past due." Kincaid stiffened. He glanced at the door as if checking to make sure it was closed. "That is confidential client information," he said automatically, though his eyes betrayed his relief that someone else knew the depth of the problem. "It is public record when you file a notice of default." Alistair countered smoothly. "We know the loan is toxic. We know Caldwell has missed 3 covenants. We know your bank is looking at a total write-off in the next quarter. And we know you don't want that on your balance sheet." I leaned forward. This was my part. "I am not here to audit you, Mr. Kincaid," I said. "I am here to buy the paper. I want to purchase the assignment of the debt. I want to become the holder of the note." Kincaid looked at me, really. Looked at me. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you want to buy a non-performing asset backed by depreciating inventory and a borrower who is technically insolvent?" "That is my business," I said. "Your business is clearing your books. I am offering you an immediate cash settlement. You get the liquidity, you get to classify the loan as sold rather than written off, and you save your quarterly bonus." Kincaid tapped a pen on his desk. He was calculating. He was a banker, not a moralist. He didn't care about my motives. He cared about his numbers. "What is the offer?" he asked. $4 million, I said. 80 cents on the dollar. Cash. "Today," Kincaid scoffed. "That is $1 million loss. The committee will never approve it. The alternative is a $5 million loss, plus the legal fees of a foreclosure that will drag on for 2 years, Alistair pointed out. "Richard Caldwell is fighting a war on 3 fronts. He has no cash. If you foreclose, you get empty lots and used cars that are hard to move. If you sell to us, you get $4 million wired to your reserve account by noon. I watched Kincaid's face. I saw the struggle. He knew Richard Caldwell. He probably played golf with him. But in this office, friendship ended where the red ink began. He picked up his phone. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. He walked out of the room. Alistair looked at me and winked. "He is going to call the chief financial officer," he whispered. "They are going to take it. They are terrified of this loan." I sat there waiting. I thought about my penthouse. I thought about the offshore account that was my safety net for old age. I was about to liquidate it all. If this went wrong, if Richard managed to wiggle out of this, I would be a 70-year-old man with nothing but a story. But then I thought about Lucas sleeping in that Honda Civic. I thought about the Venetian plaster walls in Brittany's house. I thought about the look on Richard's face when he handed me that fake medical file. Money is just a tool. It is fuel. And right now I was pouring all my fuel into a flamethrower. Kincaid came back in 10 minutes later. He looked lighter, as if a physical weight had been removed from his shoulders. "We have a deal," he said. "4 million. But we need the funds verified and transferred immediately. And you sign a waiver indemnifying the bank from any future litigation regarding the collection practices." "Done," I said. The next hour was a blur of paperwork and wire transfers. I sat with a bank associate and authorized the liquidation of my trust. I signed the mortgage papers on my penthouse, leveraging the equity to cover the gap. I watched the numbers on the screen move from my column to theirs. It was a terrifying amount of money to watch vanish in seconds. $4 million. Gone. But in exchange, I received a thick stack of documents stamped with the bank's seal. The assignment of note and liens. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Kincaid shook my hand. "It is your headache now, Mr. Stone," he said. "Good luck collecting. Richard can be difficult." I smiled. It was a cold smile that made Kincaid pull his hand back quickly. "I am counting on it," I said. We walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sun. I held the folder against my chest. It felt heavier than gold. It felt like a loaded weapon. I looked at Alistair. So I asked, "What am I now?" Alistair lit a cigarette, ignoring the no-smoking sign on the plaza. "Now, Harrison," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke, "you are the senior secured creditor of Caldwell Automotive Group. You hold the first lien on all their inventory, their receivables, and thanks to the personal guarantee Richard signed 5 years ago, you hold the lien on his personal residence in Highland Park and the vacation home in Aspen." I nodded, absorbing the new reality. 4 hours ago, I was the father of a victim begging for mercy in the court of public opinion. Now I owned the ground my enemies walked on. I had the legal right to seize their cars, their bank accounts, and the roof over their heads. "What is the status of the loan?" I asked. "It is in default," Alistair said. "Technically, under the acceleration clause, you can demand the full face value $5 million plus penalties and interest immediately. You don't have to wait. You don't have to give notice. You can call the note right now." I looked at my watch. It was 1:30. The mediation hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the law offices of Miles Sterling. They were expecting a broken old man and a mentally unstable son to walk in and surrender. "They have no idea," I said. "No, they don't." Alistair agreed. "They think they are negotiating with a family member. They don't know they are negotiating with the bank." I called Lucas. He answered on the first ring. "It is done," I told him. "I bought the debt." There was a long silence on the other end. Then a sigh that sounded like a soul returning to a body. "You really did it," Lucas whispered. "You really bet everything on me." "I bet on us, son," I said. "Now put on your best suit, the one you wore to your wedding. Shave. Look sharp. Meet me at Sterling's office in 20 minutes. We are going to finish this." I walked to my truck. I placed the folder on the passenger seat. I ran my hand over the cover. This was it, the nuclear option. Richard Caldwell had used money as a bludgeon to beat my son into submission. He had used debt to enslave him. Now the tables had turned. I was the debt. I was the consequence. I drove toward the law offices of Miles Sterling. The city seemed to part for me. I wasn't just a retired fixer anymore. I was an avenging angel with a balance sheet. And I was about to deliver a sermon on the subject of insolvency. I pulled up to the sleek office building where Sterling practiced his dark arts. I saw Lucas waiting by the entrance. He looked different. He had shaved. He stood tall. He didn't look like the man shivering in the parking lot. He looked like the CEO of a company that was about to go hostile. I got out of the truck and walked over to him. I handed him the folder. "You carry this," I said. He looked at me surprised. "Why me?" "Because they stole from you," I said. "Because they humiliated you. This is your sword, Lucas. You swing it." He took the folder. His grip was firm. He looked at the building, then at me. "Let's go get my boys back," he said. We walked into the lobby side by side. Two men against an empire of lies. We took the elevator up. The doors opened to a reception area that smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. We were ready. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now it was time to snap the jaws shut. The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor, revealing a reception area that looked less like a law office and more like the lobby of a modern art museum. Everything was glass chrome and aggressive minimalism. A receptionist with a headset guided us down a long corridor lined with abstract paintings that probably cost more than my son's education. We reached the main conference room at the end of the hall. The double doors were mahogany heavy and imposing. I pushed them open and walked in, Lucas right beside me, clutching the blue folder with the bank documents like a shield. They were already waiting for us. It was a tableau of arrogance. On one side of the massive granite table sat the Caldwell clan. Richard was leaning back in his chair, looking at his watch, as if we were wasting his valuable time. Patricia was next to him, scrolling through her phone, looking bored. Brittany sat between them and their lawyer, wearing a black dress and a mournful expression that I knew she had practiced in the mirror. She looked fragile, tragic, the perfect victim. At the head of the table sat Miles Sterling. He was a small man, with eyes like polished stones and a suit that fit him like a second skin. He didn't stand up when we entered. He just gestured to the empty chairs on the opposite side of the table. "Sit," he said. "Let's make this painless." We sat. Alistair took the seat next to me, placing his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. Lucas sat between us. He was tense, his jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping under his skin. He looked at Brittany, but she refused to meet his eyes. She stared at a spot on the wall, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. Sterling opened a leather binder. He didn't offer water. He didn't offer pleasantries. He went straight for the jugular. "We are here to discuss the terms of surrender," Sterling said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. "Given the severity of the situation, my clients are prepared to be incredibly generous. They want to avoid a public trial. They want to spare the children the trauma of seeing their father in handcuffs." He slid a document across the polished granite. It stopped perfectly in front of Lucas. "This is a settlement agreement," Sterling continued. "It outlines a path forward that keeps you out of prison, Lucas." I didn't touch the paper. I just looked at Sterling. "Humor us," I said. "What is the price of my son's freedom today?" Sterling smiled. It was a thin, predatory expression. "First, regarding the children, Brittany will retain full legal and physical custody. Lucas will be granted supervised visitation rights once a month pending a clean psychiatric evaluation from a doctor of our choosing." I felt Lucas stiffen beside me. Once a month. They were erasing him. Second, Sterling said, flipping a page in his binder. "Regarding the financial damages, Brittany has suffered immense emotional distress and loss of income due to Lucas's mismanagement of the company. To ensure the security of the twins, Mr. Stone, you will establish an irrevocable trust fund in the amount of $1 million. Brittany will be the sole trustee with full discretionary power over the disbursements. I looked at Richard. He was smirking. This was the shakedown. They knew I had money, and they were using the grandkids as leverage to get it. They wanted $1 million to pay off their own debts, disguised as child support. And Third Sterling said, dropping the final hammer. Regarding the intellectual property, Logitech Solutions is currently an asset with zero liquidity and significant liability. However, to settle the debts Lucas incurred, he will sign over 100% of the equity and all intellectual property rights, including the source code to a holding company controlled by Mr. Caldwell. There it was, the endgame. They wanted the code. They needed the code to sell to Apex. They needed Lucas to sign it away so they could flip it and save their skins. And if we refuse, I asked calmly. Sterling leaned forward. The shark smelling blood. If you refuse, we proceed with the criminal complaint. We have the police report. We have the medical records documenting Lucas's psychosis. We have witnesses who will testify to his violent outbursts. We will press charges for domestic battery, child endangerment, and corporate fraud. Lucas will go to prison for 5 to 10 years. And while he is rotting in a cell, you will spend your retirement bankrupting yourself on legal fees, trying to fight a custody battle you cannot win. Richard Caldwell chimed in, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Harrison, look at your son. He is not well. He needs help, not a prison sentence. We are offering him a lifeline. We are willing to take on the burden of the company, clean up his mess, and ensure the boys are provided for. All you have to do is sign. It is the only rational choice. Brittany finally looked up. She looked at Lucas with eyes full of tears. Please, Lucas, she whispered. Just sign it. Do it for Leo and Toby. Don't make them visit you in jail. Just let us fix this. It was a masterclass in manipulation. They were using fear, guilt, and love as weapons. They were cornering him. Lucas's hands were shaking. He looked down at the document. He looked at the clause that demanded his life's work. He looked at the clause that stole his children. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. A vein in his forehead pulsed. He was about to explode. He was about to scream at them, to tell them they were liars and thieves. And that is exactly what they wanted. They wanted an outburst. They wanted him to prove he was unstable in front of witnesses. I reached out and placed my hand firmly on Lucas's shoulder. I squeezed hard, a physical command to hold the line. Easy, I murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. Not yet. I looked at Richard. I looked at Brittany. I looked at Sterling. I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to etch their faces into my memory. The smugness, the greed, the absolute certainty that they had won. They thought they were negotiating with a helpless victim. They thought they were holding all the cards. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Is that all I asked? Sterling looked surprised by my tone. He expected begging. He expected bargaining. It is a non-negotiable offer, Mr. Stone, he said. Take it or leave it. You have 5 minutes to decide before I call the district attorney. Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Don't be stupid, Harrison. You are out of your depth. You are a retired engineer living in the past. This is business. This is how the real world works. You pay to make problems go away. So pay up and take your crazy son home. They had laid it all out. They had exposed their entire hand. They had admitted in their demands exactly what they were after: money and the code. They didn't care about Lucas's health. They didn't care about the boys. They just wanted the assets. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It was the same feeling I used to get right before I detonated a controlled charge to put out an oil well fire. The silence before the boom. I looked at Lucas. He was looking at me, his eyes wide, waiting for the signal. I nodded. I turned back to Sterling. "You made a mistake, Miles," I said softly. Sterling scoffed. "And what is that? You assumed we came here to negotiate," I said. "We didn't. We came here to foreclose." I gestured to Lucas. "Show them, son." Lucas lifted the blue folder. He didn't open it immediately. He just held it, feeling the weight of it. He looked at Brittany. The fear was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by something much colder. Contempt. He opened the folder and pulled out a single document. It wasn't the settlement agreement. It was a notice of default and acceleration. He slid it across the granite table. It spun slowly and came to a stop right in front of Richard Caldwell. "What is this?" Richard asked, looking down at the paper with disdain. "Read it," Lucas said. His voice was steady. It didn't waver. Richard picked up the document. He adjusted his glasses. He read the header. Then he read the first paragraph. I watched the color drain from his face. It started at his chin and moved up to his forehead, leaving him looking like a wax figure. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "What is it?" Dad Brittany asked, sensing the shift in the room. Richard dropped the paper as if it were burning his fingers. He looked at me with pure horror. "You," he stammered. "You can't." "I can, and I did, I said." Sterling snatched the paper. He read it quickly, his eyes darting back and forth. For the first time, the shark looked nervous. This is an assignment of debt," Sterling said, his voice losing its smooth polish. "You bought the first merchant's note. I bought the note I confirmed. I own the $5 million balloon loan that matured 60 days ago. I own the liens on the dealership inventory. I own the personal guarantee on your house, Richard. And I own the mortgage on that chalet in Aspen you bought with my son's money." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Brittany looked at her father. "Dad, what does that mean?" "It means," Richard whispered, staring at me, "that he is the bank." "Correct," I said. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. "And as the bank," I said, turning back to face them, "I have reviewed your file. You are in default. You have breached every covenant in the loan agreement. You are insolvent." I looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, you gave us 5 minutes to decide on your offer. I am giving you 1 minute to hear mine." I walked back to the table and leaned over it, placing my hands flat on the cold granite. "I am accelerating the debt," I said. "I am calling the full $5 million due immediately, right now, today." "But we don't have it," Patricia shrieked. "You know we don't have it." "I know," I said cold-heartedly. "That is why I am also exercising my right to foreclose. I have teams standing by at every one of your 12 dealerships. They are ready to seize the inventory. I have a team in Aspen ready to change the locks. And I have a team in Highland Park, Brittany, ready to put a padlock on the front door of the house you are living in." Brittany stood up, knocking her chair over. "You can't do that. That is my house. It is my collateral," I corrected her. "And since your father signed a personal guarantee, his debts are your eviction notice." I looked at Richard. He was slumped in his chair, clutching his chest. He wasn't faking this time. The reality of his ruin was hitting him like a freight train. "Now about that offer you made," I continued. "You wanted my son's software. You wanted $1 million from me." I picked up Sterling's settlement agreement. I tore it in half. Then I tore it again. "Here is my counteroffer," I said, dropping the pieces on the table. "You drop the custody petition. You drop the fake assault charges. You admit to the police that you filed a false report. And you sign full custody of the twins over to Lucas. And if we don't," Sterling asked, trying to regain some ground. "If you don't," I said, "I destroy you. I seize everything. I leave you homeless. I leave you bankrupt. And then I hand over the evidence of the embezzlement and the wire fraud to the FBI." I pointed at Brittany. I have Sarah, your former accountant. I have the recordings. I have the bank records showing you funneled investor money into a shell company. I have enough to put you in federal prison for 10 years. Brittany looked at her lawyer. Miles, do something. Sterling closed his binder. He stood up. He looked at Richard, then at me. Mr. Stone, he said, his voice flat. My client accepts your terms. No. Brittany screamed. No, Sterling looked at her. Shut up, he said. He owns you. If we fight this, you go to jail and your parents end up on the street. It is over. I looked at Lucas. He was sitting tall, watching the people who had terrorized him crumble into dust. He didn't look happy. He looked relieved. One more thing, I said. I looked at Richard. The deal with Apex. The $2 million you were counting on to save you. Richard looked up, his eyes glassy. I emailed the CEO of Apex this morning, I said. I told him the servers you are trying to sell are empty. I told him the source code doesn't exist on your hardware. I told him you were attempting to sell stolen property. Richard put his head in his hands. He is suing you for fraud, I finished. I buttoned my jacket. Come on, Lucas, I said. Let's go pick up the boys. We walked out of the conference room. We left them there in the ruins of their arrogance. We walked down the hallway past the abstract art, past the receptionist. We walked out into the lobby and into the elevator. As the doors closed, Lucas looked at me. Did we just win? He asked. I looked at the numbers lighting up as we descended. Yes, son, I said. We won. But remember this feeling. Not the joy of winning, but the peace of knowing you protected what was yours. The elevator hit the ground floor. We stepped out into the world. The sun was shining. It was a good day to be a father, and a terrible day to be a Caldwell. Sterling finished his threat and leaned back, smoothing his tie with the confidence of a man who thinks he is holding a royal flush. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the server room down the hall. Richard was smirking. Brittany was dabbing at dry eyes. They were waiting for me to beg. They were waiting for me to write a check to make the nightmare go away. I did not beg. I reached into my leather satchel and pulled out my iPad. I placed it gently on the polished granite table right in the center so everyone could see the screen. You forgot something, Brittany? I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor. You forgot that I spent 40 years in risk assessment. I never leave anything to chance. I tapped the screen. The video player opened. 1 year ago, I continued looking at her pale face. I installed a 360-degree security system in Lucas's car. It records audio and video inside and out whenever the engine is running or whenever it detects a sudden impact. Lucas didn't even know it was there, but the cloud server did. I pressed play. The audio filled the conference room, crisp and undeniable. It was the sound of a car door slamming. Then Brittany's voice, shrill and angry. You are pathetic, Lucas. You are a failure just like your father. Then the video showed Brittany sitting in the passenger seat of the Honda Civic. The timestamp was 48 hours ago. She wasn't crying. She was raging. She looked at Lucas, who was driving silently, his hands tight on the wheel. Then the moment that sucked the air out of the room. On the screen, Brittany unbuckled her seatbelt. She turned toward the side window, and she slammed her own forehead against the glass. Thud, thud, thud. In the conference room, Richard gasped. Patricia covered her mouth. On the screen, Brittany ripped the collar of her own blouse. She turned to Lucas, blood trickling down her forehead, and smiled. It was a smile that didn't belong on a human face. It was the smile of a demon. I am going to destroy you, you weak little man, she hissed on the video. I am going to tell the police you beat me. I am going to tell them you are crazy, and nobody will believe you because you are nothing. I paused the video on that frame. Brittany's face twisted in malice, blood on her brow frozen in high definition. I looked up at Miles Sterling. The shark looked like he had just swallowed a hook. He knew what he was looking at. It wasn't just a marital dispute. It was perjury. It was filing a false police report. It was a felony caught in 4K resolution. "This is inadmissible," Sterling stammered, but his heart wasn't in it. "It is perfectly admissible," I corrected him. "It is evidence of a crime in progress, and I have already sent a copy to the district attorney." Brittany was white as a sheet. She looked at the screen, then at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "But I am not done," I said. I signaled to Alistair. He lifted the heavy banker's box he had brought in and dropped it onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Dust motes danced in the air. "You threatened to send my son to prison for debt, Richard," I said, turning my gaze to the patriarch. "You said you would bury him." Alistair opened the box and slid a thick stack of bound documents across the table. They stopped right in front of Richard's trembling hands. "I am a crisis manager, Richard," said softly, "and I decided to manage yours. This morning at 9 o'clock, I walked into First Merchants Bank. I had a very interesting conversation with the vice president of risk regarding a certain non-performing asset." Richard stared at the documents. He recognized the blue cover. It was his loan agreement. "You missed 3 covenants, Richard. You are 90 days past due. The bank was desperate to get you off their books, so I helped them." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "I bought your debt, Richard. I own the $5 million balloon note. I own the liens on your 12 dealerships. I own the inventory. And thanks to the personal guarantee you signed 5 years ago, I own the mortgage on your house in Highland Park and that chalet in Aspen you bought with my son's stolen money." Richard made a sound, a strangulated whimper. He clutched his chest. "I am the bank now," I declared, "and as the holder of the note, I am exercising the acceleration clause. I am calling the full $5 million due immediately, right now, today." You can't," Richard wheezed. "I can, and I just did," I said. "If you cannot pay by the close of business, I will begin foreclosure proceedings on every single asset you possess. You will be homeless by the weekend." The room was spinning for them. I could see it in their eyes. They had walked in as kings and were being stripped down to beggars. But I had one final nail for the coffin. And about that deal with Apex Logistics, I added casually, as if it were an afterthought. "The $2 million you were counting on to save your skin." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my pocket and placed it on top of the loan documents. It was a printout of an email. "I sent this to the CEO of Apex an hour ago," I said. "I informed him that the servers you are trying to sell are empty. I informed him that the source code does not exist on the hardware you possess. I informed him that you were attempting to sell stolen property that you do not own." Richard's eyes rolled back in his head. His face turned a shade of gray I had only seen in morgues. He slumped forward, clutching his left arm, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't acting. This was the physical manifestation of total ruin. Patricia screamed. "Richard. Richard, breathe." Brittany stood up, her chair clattering backward. She looked at her father collapsing, then at me, then at the video of herself on the iPad. The walls were closing in. "It wasn't my idea," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at her mother. "She made me do it. Mom said we needed the money. She said Lucas was weak, and we had to take it before he failed. They made me steal it." It was the final collapse. The rats were eating each other. Sterling stood up and started packing his briefcase. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. "Mr. Stone," he said quietly, "I am withdrawing as counsel. Good day." He walked out, leaving his clients amidst the wreckage of their own greed. I looked at Lucas. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the photo of his sons on his phone. "We are done here," I said. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked out of the room, leaving the sound of Patricia's screams and Richard's gasps behind me. I didn't call an ambulance. They could use their own phones. I had a debt to collect and grandsons to feed. The crisis was managed. The fall of the House of Caldwell was not slow. It was a demolition. We walked out of the elevator into the lobby, and the police were already there. Alistair had been busy. He had sent the evidence of the loan fraud to the federal authorities and the video of the false police report to the local precinct. Richard Caldwell walked out of the elevator and into handcuffs. He was charged with bank fraud and falsifying credit documents. Brittany followed him in cuffs of her own, charged with filing a false police report and child endangerment. I watched from the revolving doors. I didn't feel joy. I felt the satisfaction of a mechanic who had finally fixed a broken engine. The next day, I executed the foreclosure. I sent crews to seize the inventory at the dealerships. I sent a locksmith to the Aspen Chalet, and I sent a moving crew to the house in Highland Park. Patricia Caldwell tried to barricade herself in the master bedroom, but the law does not care about the tears of a bankrupt woman. They were evicted. They left with 3 suitcases and the clothes on their backs, exactly as they had forced my son to leave. The difference was they had nowhere to go but a motel on the outskirts of town, paid for with the last of their cash. With Brittany in custody and her parents facing federal indictments, the family court judge granted Lucas full and immediate custody of Leo and Toby. There were no more arguments, no more lies. The boys came home, not to the car, but to a life where they would never be cold again. 6 months later, I drove Lucas to a construction site on the edge of the city. It was a raw plot of land where a new skyscraper was just beginning to rise. The ground was churned earth and concrete pilings. Lucas was doing well. He had launched his company Logitech under a new entity free from the Caldwell stain. He had the source code. He had the contracts. But he was still looking to me for approval. I stood by the fence watching the cranes lift steel beams. Lucas asked me if I was going to invest in his new round of funding. He expected me to write another check. He expected me to make it easy. I turned to him and shook my head. "No, son, I am not giving you a dime." He looked hurt for a moment. "But why, Dad?" "We won. You have the money." I pointed at the construction site. "Look at that foundation. It is deep. It is messy. But it is strong because they dug it themselves. I cleared the rubble for you, Lucas. I removed the parasites. I destroyed the enemies who were trying to kill you. That was my job as your father. But building the castle, that is your job. That is, if I give you the money, you will never know if you could have done it alone. You need to know you can survive without me. You need to know that your success belongs to you and only you." Lucas looked at the construction site, then back at me. He didn't argue. He straightened his tie and nodded. "You are right," he said. "I will build it myself." That night, I sat in my favorite armchair in the penthouse. The fire was crackling. Leo and Toby were on the rug, building a fortress out of blocks, laughing with the carefree joy of children who have forgotten what it means to be afraid. Lucas was in the kitchen cooking dinner. I poured myself a glass of whiskey. It wasn't the 30-year-old single malt I used to buy to impress clients. It was a cheap bottle I bought at the corner store. But as I took a sip, watching my family safe and whole, it tasted better than anything I had ever engaged. I had spent a fortune to buy a debt I didn't want to save a son who didn't know he was lost, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. The lesson I learned, and the lesson I hope you take from this, is that the most dangerous thing you can do to a man is underestimate him because of his age or his silence. We live in a world that worships youth and noise. We forget that old lions still have teeth. But more importantly, we forget that the role of a parent does not end when our children turn 18. Sometimes we have to step back and let them fall. But when the wolves come, we must be ready to step in, not with a shield, but with a sword. True wealth isn't the money in the bank. It is the ability to protect the people you love when the world tries to break them. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is not an inheritance, but the strength to stand on their own 2 feet after the storm has passed. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to step in to save a family member from a toxic situation? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay safe and never let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness.